Good afternoon, everyone, and I think it's good morning in some places. My name is Fahad, and I'm doing a webinar for Development Data Analytics Tool. And I'm recording this session so that we can post it on our website. So because there's a lot to cover, I'll begin right now. And after this session, if there are any questions or suggestions or any feedback, or if you have some topics that you may want us to cover in a future webinar, just email support@pcreducator.com, and we'll certainly consider those for one of our future webinars. So let's begin. The data analytics tool is a comprehensive system for creating on-the-fly filters, exports, dashboards, mail merges, queries, reports, and it also has advanced database functionality such as you can have logical conditions, you can have aliases, aggregates, pivoting, parameters, and you can also have flexible security permissions. So in this webinar, I'll focus more on the development side of the data analytics tool, and we'll build some queries for we'll build some development specific queries in this webinar. And so let me go ahead and click on the DAT tool at the top. And I'll even zoom in a little here. Okay. So whenever you are building reports, not just development reports or not just development queries, but any other type of query, there are things that you have to consider. So the first question you have to ask yourself is, what information am I trying to extract from my query? And then you have to kind of come up with a workflow of, okay, how am I going to get from this place to that place? What information I'll have, and what tables will I be using in order to get the information that I need? So I want to cover the most common tables that you would typically use in building development queries. So I'll click on New on the left-hand side here. And then there are many different categories, so let's focus on the development category right now. And there are several tables. So one of the most common tables that you'll often use in your reports is the donor table. So let me click on this donor table. Now, in this donor table, we have different fields. We have the donor ID, we have the donor type, we have the contact name, how much they donated ever, how much did they donate this year, last year, and so forth. So in this table, you get the basic donor information. The other common table is the donation table. In the donation table, you get the donation-specific information such as the donation date, the donation amount, the donation type. The type would be such as a gift or a pledge payment or a soft credit or a matching donation. So that would be your donation type. A couple other fields I want to highlight. One is the original amount. Then we have donation amount. Then we have the written off amount. So what is the difference between these three? Let's say that you have a pledge for $1,000. When the pledge first comes in, the donation amount will be $1,000. The original amount will be $1,000, and the written off amount will be $0. Let's say that $100 of that pledge was written off. When that amount gets written off, then the original amount remains as $1,000. The donation amount then becomes $900, and the written off amount that then becomes $100. So this is a way to track what the original amount of the donation was, and then what is the current amount after something was written off. So these are some of the fields that you may often use when you're creating reports about your pledges. The other common table is the the donor attributes table. So in our system, when you have constituents, you may tag them in terms of how they're affiliated with your school. So are they a current parent? Are they a former parent? Are they a friend? Are they an alum? Are they a board member? And so forth. So the attribute description would show you what a donor is. So if they're one of the items that I mentioned earlier. And if there is a comment on that attribute, you have the comment field, and then there are other fields such as the fiscal year begin end. For example, if you wanted to find all the current parents that were current parents in a certain fiscal year or in a range of certain fiscal years, so you can use fiscal year begin and end fields for that purpose. I want to clarify, so we have the attributes, and then we also have the donor type field. So let's say that if I have a donor that is a current parent, that donor is also an alum, and that donor is also a board member. In that case, that donor would have three attributes: current board member, current parent, and alum. But that person would only have one donor type. So if I go back to my donor table, there's a donor type field. So out of those three attributes, when you set up attributes, you give them a priority in the development module. So whichever is the highest priority, that automatically becomes the donor type. So if my donor has the highest attribute with the highest priority, and that attribute is called board member, then although that person is a current parent, alum, and a board member, their type would be board member because that's the highest attribute that you have set up in your system. The other common tables are, one of them is fund allocation. So if you are building a report that has donation information and you want to know what fund what fund and campaigns that donation is associated with, you would use fund allocation table for two reasons. One reason is to get the amount from here. So this amount would be the allocated amount. The other reason is that the fund allocation table will be connected later on. It would connect to your funds and your campaigns table. So these are the other two common tables that I want to go over. So the campaigns table, this will give you the campaign information like the campaign description, the goal, the date, and so forth. So campaign table would be used to find, okay, these are all my donations, and this is the campaign they're allocated to. That's what you would use the campaign table for. Similarly, you would use the funds table to find the donations that are allocated to a certain fund. So this one has a fund description, fund code, and so forth. And now let me go to the households table. I also want to go over that table because that is a very common table that you use in your development queries. And in our system, everything is integrated. So although household table is not inside of development, because household table can be used for admin reports and admissions reports and so forth, but it has the details of each family, like the parent information or the contact information for each family, their emails, their phone numbers, addresses, and so forth. So the households table is a very common table where you would get more details about each contact or each donor. The other common table is the relation student inquiry teacher table. What this is typically used is that, let's say you're building a donor report and you want to find out what students a donor is associated with. So let's say you wanted to find all the donors and find out if they have any enrolled students in the school. You could use a relations table, and then you could connect the relations table later to the student information table. So the relations table, I have covered that in another webinar, but the main purpose is, so that you can connect it to like the student table or the faculty table, so that you can have a connection between the household and the student table. So this is a link between the two. And it also lets you define relationships. So if you wanted to put a condition to find everyone who's a parent or everyone who's a grandparent or everyone who's a primary household or secondary household, this table would be used and conditions would be added to this table to kind of filter that information. So I went through the more common tables in the development system that you're most likely going to use in your queries. And I created this nice diagram for you that I'll share after the webinar. And this is just it shows you how everything is connected, or how the common tables are connected. So household table connects to donor table connects to donor attributes. It also connects to donation table. Then donation table connects to the fund allocation table, and then the fund allocation connects to campaigns, and it also connects to funds. And we'll add more tables as well in this diagram in the near future. But I wanted to show you this, as these are the common tables. And this does not mean that the relationship is one way. It does not mean that you have to start with the household table and then connect it to donor and then connect it to donation giving. You can go both ways. So you can start with the donor table first and then connect it to the household table and then connect it to these other tables. Or you can even start with funds and then go up fund allocation, donation, and then so forth. But typically, I would advise starting with the donor or the household table when you're creating development queries, because in the future, if you want to update those queries, it'll be easier to get rid of the other items if they are subcategories to these main groups. So I'll try to show you an example in a little bit of what I mean. But this diagram should be very useful in creating some of the more common development reports. All right, so let's go ahead and actually build a report or build a query. So the first query that I'll build is called all donors with donations. So my goal in this query is to find all the donors that I have in the system and all of their donations, and then I also want to know what the campaigns and funds those donations are allocated to. And you'll notice that I've been using the term query and report interchangeably because our data analytics tool refers to it as query, so I'm trying to use that terminology so that it's consistent throughout the documentation and the training video. So you may call it a report, but in this webinar, I'm calling what you would say report basically a query because they're almost interchangeable. All right, so let's actually begin. As I said, I want my donors and the donation. So, okay, how do I even start? So let me pull up my handy diagram that I created. Okay, so it says that I could probably use the donor table because, as I said earlier, donor table has the basic donor information. So, okay, I can start with the donor table. So I'll go to my data analytics tool, and I'll pull up the development category. And then I have the donor table here. So I'll click the donor table. Okay, so now I have the donor table. Let's grab a few fields. I'll check off contact name, donor ID, and donor type for now. And I'll go ahead and save it. Now, every time I add a table or if I add fields and so forth, I like to run my report right away and by clicking results here. So I like to run the query by clicking results, and then here you can see the contact name, donor ID, donor type. The reason that I don't wait till the end, because sometimes if I have a complicated query, I add a bunch of stuff to it. And then at the end, if I click results, I may realize that earlier on I made a mistake somewhere. So I often just like to add a table, add the fields that I want, and and run it right away so I can see, okay, I'm at least getting the results that I would expect. And then I can add the next table and see the results again and so forth. So I don't have to wait until the very end to figure out if my query works or not. Okay, so I have my donor information. Now what I want is I want to get the household information. I want to know what the addresses of these donors are. I want to know, okay, what are the phone numbers or emails or so forth. I want more information about these donors. So as I said earlier, households table is used for that information. So if I go back to my diagram, it says that the households table can be connected to the donor table. So okay, now I know where to go with this. So I go back to my query, and if I want to connect a new table to my donor table, I simply click the plus on the left-hand side. And then in this drop-down here, I have different tables, and I would pick the households table. And now I can actually grab other information like address, city. I can grab the state, the zip. And I'm also going to get the ID. And let me get the contact information. So you'll notice that it says parent one names and emails and things like that. But as I was saying, because everything is integrated, parent one in this case would also mean contact one and contact two. So if I have a donor family, I may have spouse one and spouse two in that family, or contact one and contact two. So the parent one and parent two fields are basically contact one and contact two fields within a donor record. So I'll just grab the first name, the last name. These are all in alphabetical order. And I'll grab maybe the email, and then I'll also grab the parent two email, and then also grab the parent two first name, and then I'll grab the parent two last name. So these are the fields that I want in my report for now. I scroll down and I click save, and then I click results to kind of see right away what my query looks like. So I have my contact name, I have my types, I have the address information, and then I have the contact information, the first name, last name, emails, and the parent two or contact two first name, last name. So far so good. Let's say that now I want to add the donation information, because of course my query is to find all the donors and the donations. So where do I go next? So let's pull up the diagram again. So it says that in order to get donation information, I have to connect it to the donor table. So if I go back to my query, I have the donor table, so I simply click the plus sign, and then I connect it to the donation giving table, and now I have my donation information. So I'll just grab the donation date, I'll get the donation amount, I'll get the donation type so I know if it's a soft credit or pledge or gift or whatnot. And I'll also grab is voided. So if my donation is voided, I can discount it or not include it in my report later on if I don't want to. So I have the donation date, I have the donation amount, I have the donation type, and I also already have my contact information, so I don't need to select it again because I've already done that in another table. I think I'm good with what I have now. I'll just get this basic information from this report, and I'll go ahead and click save. And I'll run it to make sure that I have the information here. So I have my contact information, and then I have the donation amount, then I have the donation date, the type, and whether or not it's voided. So far I'm doing pretty well. Now I also want to know what campaigns and funds these donations are associated with or allocated to. So let's get the diagram out again. And it says that donation has to connect to the fund allocation table, and the fund allocation would connect to the campaigns and the funds table. So if I go back to my query, I have the donation table already in my report. So if I click plus, I can grab the fund allocation table. And from here, I don't really care about these IDs because I'm going to get the actual description name in the next table. So I'll grab the amount. This will be the allocated amount. And I'll go ahead and click Save. And then from here, the diagram says that I can connect fund allocation to campaigns and funds. So I'll click the plus on fund allocation. And I'll connect that to my campaigns first. And from here, I want the campaign description. I think that's all I want right now. I just want to know the name of the campaign. So I'll just use campaign description. And similarly, I can click plus on fund allocation. And I can connect it to funds. And I just want to know the fund description for now. And I'll click Save. All right, so I'm ready to run this query again. So if I click results, I have my donor information, I have their address information, I have my donation information, and I have the what each donation is allocated to. So I'm able to get all the information that I had initially asked for, but I don't like how my query looks like. I don't like the fact that it's being sorted by the contact name. I don't like the fact that it says parent first name and parent last name. I'd rather say contact first name, contact last name. I don't also like the fact that it shows 12 a.m. for the donation date. And I don't like the fact that the amount and the donation amount, it's not formatted with the $sign. So I want to fix all of these or adjust all of these items. So what I do is I go to fields on the left-hand side. And first I want to sort it by the donation date and then the contact name. So what I do is I grab the donation date and I move it all the way to the top. So whichever field is at the top, that is how your query is being sorted. So donation is at the top, donation date, and I can also do ascending or descending order, up to me. So it's sorting by donation date and then after that by contact name and then by ID and so forth. So the other thing I wanted to do is that I didn't like how the date format looks like. So on the right-hand side, we have a display format column. So if I click the drop down, I can actually let me first save that I moved it up here. So let me save it first. Now in the display format, I'll go ahead and pick. There are many different versions of the dates you can pick. Like you have the timing, you have the times, you have the full like month and day and so forth. But I'll just keep it simple and I'll pick this format here. And then if I scroll down, similarly for the amount, donation amount, I'll select this format. And then for the fund allocation amount, I'll select this format. And I also want to relabel these fields here. So this is called alias. So these are my database fields, but I can rename them for the purpose of my query. So what I'll say is I'll call it like contact one email, contact one first name, contact one last name, contact two email, contact two first name, contact two last name. I also want to rename amount to allocated amount because if someone else is looking at my report, they might confuse what does amount mean and why is it different from donation amount, or why is my amount the same as donation amount? Why do I have these two fields? What does amount mean? So I would relabel this to allocated amount. So I can make the distinction between the donation amount and the allocated amount. So I think so far I adjusted what I wanted. I fixed the display formats. I'm sorting it by the date first. And then I've relabeled some of the fields, and then let me go ahead and click Save. And I'll go to Results. Okay, so now I like things better. So now the donations amounts are formatted nicely. I have allocated amount is labeled correctly and formatted nicely. The donation date looks pretty good, and it is being sorted by the donation date. So these are my earliest donations. So far it looks pretty good, but oh, and also the contact information is updated from parents to contacts, so that looks pretty good. Now, I like this query so far, but I want to organize the columns now. I don't like the fact that it says allocated amount and then campaign description and then fund description. Maybe allocated should come after campaign and fund description. And so I can reorganize some of my columns. So if I go to column order, I can grab and move these fields up and down. So if I wanted to show campaign description first and fund description, then allocated amount, that's fine. If I wanted to show maybe the donation type first, then the donation date, then the donation amount, that would work. The addresses, I want to do addresses, then city, then state, then zip. I think that makes more sense. Then contact, I'll do first name, last name, email, and contact to first name, last name, and email. So I can organize how I want to arrange my columns, and then I click next. And now my columns are arranged in the way that I described. And then allocated amount is at the end. So again, you're noticing every time I make a change to my query, I click on results, so I'm not surprised later on. I want to make sure that each step that I'm following is getting me to the query that I'm trying to build. So I have this query now. The other thing I want to now add to it is I want to know from all of these donors that I have, which of these donors are associated with a student that goes to my school. So how do I do that now? Because that's another level that we're adding. So let's pull out the diagram. It says that in order to get student information, I have to use the household table and connect it to the relations, students, inquiries, teachers table, and then from there I can connect it to the student info table. Okay, so I have a plan on how to get to that information now. So I go to query and I find my households table. So this is here my household table. I click plus, and then from here I can get the table that I need. So it was the relations table here, and I'll save it. I don't really care about pulling like grandparents or anything specific. I'll just use this table to link to my next table. And okay, so I have this, and then I'll click plus sign on there. So what I did is I click plus on the relations table, and then from here I can get the student info table. And now I can get student information, their ID, their name, their grade level, and so forth, and I can save it. And I can click results. And now I have all of my donor information, and then I have the student information at the end. And of course, I can just organize it a little bit better. So I want maybe the student last name, then the first name, then the grade level, and then the ID. So I can organize it. Now I have all of my student information in this report too. Let's say that we have many different donation types. We have pledges, we have pledge payments, we have gifts and soft credits and so forth. Let's say that our goal is to eventually export this report and sum up the total donations. But the thing is that we don't want pledge payments to be counted, because you have a pledge, let's say you have a pledge for $1,000, and then a pledge payment is made against that pledge for $100. If you include both a pledge and a pledge payment, then you're getting duplicate counts because you're counting the total donation amount for the pledge, and then you're also counting the pledge payment separately into your total. So when you are creating a query like this and you only want to count the pledge like its original amount or its donation amount, and you don't want to count the payment, add the payment on top of it, I would exclude the pledge payment from my query. So how do I do that? I go to query, and I have to think about, okay, if I want to exclude the donation type, what table is it actually found in? So I know that it's found in this donation type is in the donation table. So I click the link now. So now I'm not linking it to any new table. I'm just opening the existing table by just clicking the link on it. And you'll notice that there's a section for conditions. And then there are different options here. So what I want to do is I want to say that donation type, and then there are different operators here. There's equal, not equal, and many other things. So I'll say not equal to, and then in the third option, I'll say pledge payment and click add. What this will do is it'll get rid of all of my pledge payments from my query. So I'll add this condition, and then I'll click save and click results. Now, the donation type is only pledge or gift or anything else but pledge payment. So that is how you can exclude a type or a field. So this concept could be applied to any other field, whether you wanted to find a range of donation dates, or if you wanted to find everyone that donated more than a certain amount, or if you wanted to find all the invoice or all the donations that were not voided. You can use conditions to set up specific conditions for your queries. I'll show you another example of this. So in this query, I have all of these students, but right now I didn't put in any condition to find just the enrolled students. So what this means is that right now it's pulling all of my students, whether they have graduated or withdrawn. It's not only pulling the enrolled students. So I could do the same thing in this case. I can go to my query. I can pull up the student info table, and I can say, okay, I only care about students that have a status of enrolled, because I don't care about graduated and withdrew for this query. So I'll just click enrolled, add this condition, and then save it. And then I can click results. And now it would only include students that are actually tagged as enrolled in the system. I want to make one sort of a clarification. So I use the status from the student info table, which is fine in this case. But if your school is using other divisions, like if you have summer division or you have some other programs that are outside of your academic division, there's another table called student status by division, where you can actually specify, okay, I only want students that are enrolled in this division or that division. So I've covered that in another webinar, but I wanted to clarify. I basically just use a very simple status from this table, but I could have made it a bit more sophisticated to find only students that are not enrolled in my summer school and so forth. Okay, so I have my donor information, my household information, I have the giving information, fund campaigns, and so forth. And on top of that, I also added the student information. I added the student information just to kind of show you as an example, but I'm going to get rid of it now. So if I click a table like the relations table, and if I delete it, anything that is branched off of that table would be deleted. So anything that's kind of like subcategory to this table would be deleted. This is why I typically start with the donor or the household table, because if I started with the fund table and then I had later on added households to it, and if I wanted to not have the fund table in my report, I'd basically have to rebuild it, because if I were to delete fund, if it was all the way at the top, it would delete everything below it. So that's why I try to start with the table that I'll use for most of my reports, which is either the donor or the households table. All right, so if I want to get rid of the student information, I simply click the relations table and I delete it. And anything, that table or anything that was branched off of it or a subcategory to it would be removed. So now once I removed it, if I click results again, I can see that the student information is removed. Now that I have my report, if I want, I can click the export button and it'll export it into a spreadsheet. And I can save it so that I can use it in the future. So the export button, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. You just click export and it'll download the report in an Excel spreadsheet. So it's going to take it'll probably take a few seconds. It depends on how many records you have. So here I've downloaded the query and then I can click on it and open it. So this part is, I think most people are familiar with the export functionality as we have it in many different places in our system. So here I have this query now downloaded into an Excel spreadsheet. Now let me go ahead and save this. So I'll go ahead and click save. And I'll give it a name. So I'm just going to call it DAT Development Webinar. And when you are saving a report, make sure that you basically pick a group that you want to save it in. So you may already have development and other groups. If you want to create a new group, you click Manage Groups and you can create a new one. So I'll just pick the development group. And then you can save it in any group, but don't save it in the PCR imported group because we often update that group with new reports and we update existing reports that are in that group. So if you add something in there, then you could lose that report. So you should save it in any table, any group, but the development, but the import, PCR imported group. So I'll pick the development group for now. And here at the bottom, I see the security roles that I can make visible for my report. So if I want to give all of my development personnel access to this report, I may give this report a development full and maybe a development read role. If I don't want anybody to access it, I just want to access it myself, I can uncheck both of these. And if I save it, nobody but myself would be able to access the report. So for now, I'll give it a development role. And then here, it gives you all the fields that you have used, but you can override this with a different description. So if this report is supposed to show all the donors and their donations, you can basically override this description with something else like donors with their donations. Give me 1 second. I need to pull up my other screen. To turn off my phone because people are calling my work line. Okay, I think that should take care of it. All right, so donors with donations, that's the name I'll give it. And then I'll scroll down and save new report. If this was an existing report that I was just making updates to, then in that scenario, I would see an update button at the bottom. So I'll go ahead and click the Save New, so it saves it as a brand new report this time. So the report name is DAT Development Webinar. So I'll just go ahead and click Save. Actually, before I do that, I also want to make sure that I have all the fields that I need. And then I'm just going to go ahead and click Save New Report. Okay, so I've saved this report. It's called DAT Development Webinar. Now let's get to the next query. For the next one, what I want to do is I want to showcase the pivot functionality. And the pivot functionality, I'll display that by showing you all the donations, and I want to show you the sum of the donations that have come in for each fiscal year, the current fiscal year, and the last 4 fiscal years. So that's what we'll go over next. So let me go ahead and pull up my DAT again. So I'll click DAT at the top. And then I'll click New. And because in this query, what I want is the donations, I don't really need to start with the donor table because I'm not planning to get donor information in my query. I want the donation information specifically. So I'll open up the development, and this time I'll actually start with the donation table. Now that I have the donation table, my goal is to, in a separate column, I want to know for each fiscal year what the sum of the donation amount is for each fiscal year. So I'm going to go ahead and check the donation amount. That's fine. And then I have a couple of fields. There's a fiscal year, and then there's a fiscal year offset. I want to show you what the difference between the two is and why I would use fiscal year offset and not fiscal year. So when I go to fiscal year, I see different options. I see 18, 19, 17, 18, 16, 17, and so forth. So if I'm building my query and I have a condition in my query for, like, if I want to do this year and the last 4 years, I may have to say 2018, 19, and the previous 4 years. But then what happens when the next fiscal year comes around? Then I have to come back and update this query, so then it'll show me my 1920 and 1819 and so forth. So I don't want to keep on updating my query each year. So instead what I do is I use a fiscal year offset field, because this has these numbers. So there's 0, there's -1, -2, and so forth. 0 means current fiscal year, -1 means last fiscal year, -2 means 2 fiscal years ago, and so forth. So if I use this condition, then when the next fiscal year comes around, automatically 0 would become my new fiscal year. So this way I don't have to keep updating my query each time. So I'm going to go ahead and do a condition. So instead of saying equal or not equal, in this example, I'll go ahead and do multi-select. And I will select 0, -1, -2, -3, and -4. So current fiscal year and the last 4 fiscal years. And I'll click Add as a condition. I'll click the Add. And then in the fields, I'll have the donation amount because I want to sum by the donation amount. And then I'll also select the fiscal year offset because that's one of the conditions that I'm using. And I'll go ahead and click Save. Next, what I need to do, and one other thing, in order to use the pivot functionality, 2 main conditions have to be met. One is that the condition has to use a multi-select. As of right now, it has to use some sort of a multi-select option so that you can pick a few options from your fields. The other requirement is that whatever condition you have here has to be visible, and then whichever field that you want to, for example, do a sum for, that field also has to be visible. So that's why I selected these fields, and then I used a multi-select condition. And I'll click Save. So then when I go to my fields, first I'm just going to make my donation amount be a nice format with the $sign. And then if I have it set up correctly, I should see a pivot aggregate with a drop down. And in this drop down, there are different options, but I want to sum the donation amount. So I'll click Sum Donation Amount, and then I'll click Save. And then I'll click Results. So now this query tells me that as of today, or as of this fiscal year, this much has been donated. Last fiscal year, this much was donated. The year before that, this much, and then this and this. Now, I can tell you that this wouldn't be a correct query because I haven't yet excluded my pledge payment. So as I was saying, if I wanted to not count the pledge payments and the pledge multiple times, I would want to come here and actually exclude my pledge payments so that they're not counted twice in the total. So I can come here and then I can go to donation type and I can just say not equal to, and I can say pledge payment. Now, if I just wanted the totals for my soft credits only, then I could do equal soft credit, or if I just wanted the totals for my gifts, I could do equal gifts and so forth. So there are many different ways you can set this up. So I'm just going to exclude my pledge payments and click Save. So my numbers now should be slightly different because the pledge payments won't be counted. The same amounts would be counted that are already included in the pledge amounts. So now this is a pretty nice report, and once I save it, I don't have to worry about updating it each year. It'll always be live next year. It'll look at the new fiscal year. The year after that, it'll look at the new fiscal year and so forth. So that's a pretty cool way to set up this report. Let's see what I have next on my list. So in the next part, I want to show you how to take a standard query that we have deployed to all of our schools and how to update to kind of personalize it for yourself. So if we click on the DAT at the top, there are different groups here. So I'm going to pick the PCR imported. As I was saying earlier, the PCR imported group are the queries that we deploy to all schools. So these are standard queries. And we have many different ones here. So I'm going to scroll down to some of the development ones. So we have a query that shows us all the donors that have donated less than $500. Then we have another one that says all the donors that have donated more than 1,000 but less than 5,000 and so forth. So there are already pre-built queries, and if there is a query that you don't find and that you think would be beneficial for everyone, you can email support@pcreducator.com and we can build it and we can deploy it to everyone so that everyone can access that query. Let's say that I have these queries here, but I want to kind of personalize it to make it my own version of it. For example, I want to add something more to it. Let's take this one as an example. So this one is called Development Fiscal Year. So if I open it up, this one is very similar to the one that I just built, except that it also shows us the contact names and their donor type. So it tells me that Abby donated $1 this fiscal year. She donated $17.50 last fiscal year. She didn't donate anything before that, and before that she donated $500. So if you take a look at this setup, you can see that this was set up similar to my other report, except that they have included the donor table so that they can also split it by the contact name and the type. If the donor table wasn't part of it, then it would look like my other report that I had. And even in this report, you can see that pledge payment is excluded and also soft credits are excluded in the sum. So you can always adjust it to include soft credits or exclude something else and use this as a starting point. So let's say that I want to add household information to this existing standard query. How do I do that? So I go back to my handy diagram and I say, okay, so the household, I have to connect that through the donor table. So then I come back to this query and then I have the donor table here and I click the plus sign and then I have the households table and I simply pick whatever fields I want. If I want address, if I need anything else, but basically the concept is exactly the same that I showed you before. You can save the fields that you want. You can run your own query with the new information. So I added this information. And then what you can do is you can go to save and just save it as a new version. So I can call it like Development Fiscal Year My Version. And then instead of in the PCR imported, I can save it in the development group. This way now I'll have my own version that was built off of the standard query. so that in the future I can use this version instead. So I can click Save New, and then my version would be saved along with the original version. So if I just search for my version, I can see that now I have my own version of that query saved. So this is how easy it is to take an existing query, whether you made the query or PCR made it, and you can build off a new query off of that original one. So that's something that would be very useful. Let's go over the next item on the list, and that is how do you add queries to your dashboard? So if I go to my development dashboard, I have many different widgets. Like I have campaigns, I have events, I have all these really nice things. But I want to add the query that I had just built earlier on in the webinar. How do I do that? So what happens is if you scroll all the way down, there's a drop down that says new widget, and there are many different options. So the one that you want to use is called Data Analytics Grid. And basically what I'm showing you applies to any other dashboard, not just development. That applies to admin dashboard, admissions, or finance dashboard. So the concept is the same. So I pick this option, Data Analytics Grid, and I click Add. And this widget shows up at the top. Now all I have to do is I click the drop down and pick whichever query I want on this dashboard. So the one that I did was, it was under development, and it was called, so there's one called like my version of it. And then there was another one called DAT Development Webinar. So if I click this one, I can see the earlier query that I built in this widget, or if I want, I can switch it to something else. So if I want to switch it to, let's say if I want to switch this one to the PCR imported, the original one, the fiscal year one. So I can even do that. So if I come here and I pick the fiscal year one, so now this new one will show me the contact names and how much they donated each fiscal year. Then if I want to get to the actual query itself, I can click the Data Analytics Grid link, and it'll actually take me to that query. And I can also export from here. There's an export option here. And I can also add multiple widgets. So I can go back down, add another Data Analytics Grid widget, and I can link that to a different query. So this is how you basically add DAT queries to your dashboard, and you can always move them around, left, right, up, and down. So we're almost done. The final thing I want to show is, earlier on I mentioned that I always try to include some sort of an ID in my queries, whether it's a donor ID or household ID for a specific purpose. So for example, let's say that I go to my list of contacts now under development, and I want to find all of my alums. So if I do type equals, so I'll say type equals, and then here I'll say alum, and then click search. I have 61 alums in my database. Let's say that I want to run that report, the one that I made earlier with the donor information and the donation information and the allocations, but I only wanted to run for these 61 people. Out of these 61 people, whoever has actual donations. So I'll go ahead and select these 61, and then if I go to multi-action menu, there's an option called DAT. So if I select that, and then if I come here, I would only see a list of queries that have a household ID in them. That's why I had included that ID in my query. So I'll go ahead and pick DAT Development Webinar because that's the one I had set up. So now it only runs that for those people that I had selected, and I only get 12 records because out of all those people, there are only 12 records with some sort of donation. So Just like how you run like PDF reports from our system, now you can even select records and run DAT queries from our system. So I think that that is all that I wanted to cover. And again, this has been recorded, and I'll send out an email with this recording. And if you have any suggestions for the future webinar, what kind of queries you may want us to build, or some other topic that you would like us to go over, just email support@pcreducator.com. I want to thank you all for joining me, and hopefully you can take the rest of the Friday off, maybe. I don't know. So, okay, have a wonderful day, and we'll be in touch soon. Thank you. Bye.